we have to hire an expert and we're taking care of a farm, what type of facilities do they have? Is it protected? Livestock, crops. What other directions do I need? Do I need a direction on what type of fertilizer to use? No, not if I'm an expert. How about what do I do with the animal feces? No, I know how to do that. But I still have risk. Why? Because I don't live on another planet. And there's something nearby. And what comes out of the woods? And do I have any crazy people around? Because if I do, I need a risk mitigation plan. Maybe a few guards, trapping system. But do I worry about tornadoes? I can't worry about that. That's beyond my control. And how about the damage created by the tornado? Well, that's why we have insurance. I mitigate risk as an expert, but I can't totally control it. Therefore, if something like this happens, who should pay? The vendor or the owner, the buyer? The buyer. Because all I want in my supply chain when I buy services is a very smart person who can see into the future, who's going to act in my best interest. Everyone makes mistakes, and I'm going to be more forgiving because mercy is for the merciful. And at the end of the day, whatever I can't explain, I have come to a belief that good things happen to good people. And that's how we should deliver services. So, we're moving from identifying in detail technical scope to identifying what we think we want. And our vendors now will take over control, do their service, and mitigate our risk and act in our best interest. How did I learn what this problem was? How many of you think it's different in the private world than it is with government services? Is there a difference there? In procurement. So I go over to Brunsfield and I meet this genius. How smart is this man? This man is a developer. He develops a piece of property here. If they sell units here for $100,000, his price starts at $1 million. And then he always has his penthouse go for $3 million. Remembering that the neighbor's property is only worth $100,000 a unit. How does he do this? He creates value. He uses common sense and logic. And before he builds, he goes into the future. He said, who is going to buy this? What do they want? How do I create value? One thing that sets him apart, he's honest. When you have honesty in a supply chain, you're sure that everybody wins. Is the cost going to go up or down? Go down, because everybody who wins is so appreciative. So what he does to mitigate costs, he mitigates risk. So when anybody charges him a price he knows is way above what it should cost, he asks them, what is costing you so much in delivering the service? And whatever they identify, he moves that task to somebody else. And he does it in a way that's staggering. I still remember this instance where he had a piling job. His budget was $1 million. The vendor said, his budget was $500,000. The vendor said it's going to cost me $1 million. He sent an admin person out to find out why the cost was so high. She quickly moved the high costing risk to somebody else who didn't have risk. The cost went to $500,000. The vendor did what they were good at. They were totally happy and they got paid right away. Everybody won. His motto is, honesty is a capability. It's when you can see into the future. People who are not honest just lack capability. So he told everybody in his company, we pay nobody off. If I find out that you paid somebody off to get something done, you're fired. He said the only reason you have to pay people off is when you didn't plan ahead of time. His motto was integrity. So what this gentleman did, he went in and developed this condo development with 3 towers. The 3 towers were positioned to cut the wind. So the wind flowed one way. He positioned his towers so it maximized a breeze right down the middle. So he created this marsh-like property that's spectacular. Behind it is an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And at the end of the pool is a gazebo where people could sit there and meditate. Now, how did he make this environment very valuable? There was a busy street up front, busy streets on the side, with properties that didn't look really good. He built this environment 1 floor up. All of a sudden, you're living in heaven. You don't know what's around, you can't hear any noise, and all you have is total peace and a breeze coming through the middle. When they started building this, and the value was over $1 million per unit, by the time they got done, it's worth over $2 million. The U.S. Embassy went in here and saw the property, immediately leased the whole back block. They keep 40% of everything they build. Why? Because by looking at past history, in 10 years, everything doubles in value. So they decided to keep 40% of every development, and now they're also the property manager. And because they maintain the property and keep the security now, the value is shot up. But this man had a problem. He couldn't control the entire supply chain, even if many of the people worked for him. So what did we find out? He controlled or perceived that he controlled the whole thing, but in actuality, he finally found out that he didn't. What was the problem caused by? It was caused by people getting into silos and not helping each other. Now, why would people do this? Because it was easy. And because they could become very technical. And what they would do when there was a problem caused by another silo, they would sit on it. And then when it got bad, they would tell the boss. And he realized that this had to stop. So what we did, we realized that these people would have to get out of their silo, communicate, and think of the entire supply chain. In order to do this, does their language have to become more simplistic or more complex? More communication or less communication? And that's best value. Right? It's changing the paradigm. And what did we find out? We found out that it was not a problem between buyer and vendor. It was a problem caused by who? People. People naturally think of who? Themselves. And if we could just now convince people that this was true, that if they thought in the best interest of everybody, the cost would go down and the value would go up, now we have a winner. And that is best value. Now, what this man did next was profound. Once he realized this, he said, my people have to change the paradigm in their mind. How am I going to change this? He came to me, took me to a local university, made the arrangements, went back to his staff, and he said, everybody who's a senior manager now has to go get their PhD. And everybody who's a secondary level has to get their master's, and after they get their master's, we want you getting your PhD. And what are you going to do your PhD on? You're going to identify what's going on in your job, in our company, and how we change it, and how we measure it, and how we implement that, and you're going to do your PhD and master's on the job, and I, as the president of the company, am going to pay for everything. And over the next 15 years, The goal is at least 20 PhDs and 100 master's degrees. He said, this will impact our company. Wow. Amazing? Staggering. And so that's our next research project. 15 years, we're going to change everything in their supply chain. Everybody who touches that company. They currently turn over about $1.5 billion a year. State of Minnesota, 5 years of results. Over 300 projects, almost $300 million worth of value in construction. The change order rate at 15%. And who causes the most deviation? It's who? The buyer. So if there's one thing you can take away from this, when you as a buyer write a contract, make sure the contract protects who? The vendor. Does that make sense? Oh, I can see people a little uncomfortable here. You need a break. No, it's a change of paradigm, isn't it? It's something you would never have thought of before you came into this room, right? But we've watched this. We have all the documentation. This is only one of our clients, or one area of our clients, but every study we've done over the 17 years, it's exactly the same result. It's when we bought it low bid, it's when we bought it best value. Regardless, it's always that same result because we put the measurement system in place. State of Oklahoma, 20 tests, $100 million. It probably cost them, in working with us over 2 years, about $200,000. Look at what their savings are. See, I come from a very, traditional environment. We don't normally say that with $200,000 we can make $15 million. But that's what it is amounted to. And what have they bought? You name it. The most amazing thing about the state of Oklahoma that's different from other clients, they had no technical expertise. Wow. And if any of you have had this experience, you'll know what I'm talking about. When you look in somebody else's eyes and there's a stare, a blind, blank stare, and they have no idea what to do next. I realized that I had practiced too much what? Control. Too much it is. And I realized I had 7 kids behind him. Okay, so what's the solution? This was my own family I was dealing with. I decided, because I had so much information at that point in time that what I had done was wrong, that I made a unilateral decision without even talking to my wife. And of course she went ballistic. I decided that I would never practice control again with my family. So I got them together, implemented a total new philosophy of no control. The first thing they wanted to know was, what is the definition of no control? So I said, the simplest explanation I can give you is no control means you have no rules. And they said, how is that possible, Dad? I said, because if you have no rules, you can receive no punishments. So I will not punish you for anything you do from now on. So the interface that I want to have with you now is, when you have a problem that you can't solve, you come to me. You need no approvals for anything you do. Do you think my kids became more honest or less honest with me? More. Do you think they wanted more of my advice or less of my advice now? More. Amazingly, what happened out of this was that the environment became much better. What I did now, though, instead of controlling, I tried to expose them to reality in simple ways. I tried to educate them, but I gave them total freedom. And somehow that environment prevented catastrophic incidents. How many of you saw what happened in the last go-around with the banks? And people are saying that's a lack of regulation. That's what caused them to do that. How many of you have heard of the movie called Inside Job, Wall Street, that came out? Okay, put that down on your notes. Go get the movie. Inside Job, right? You can get it free off the website. Listen to it. That was not a lack of regulation. Those people were criminals. Even though they were sitting in very high positions, they actually did criminal action. They did what was unethical. They broke the law. Right? That was not a lack of regulation. That was criminal. If you set the right environment, the environment will prevent catastrophic incidents. What did we find out? Use common sense, use logic, and use observation. Here's the model. Everything that happens over time, including a project or a service we buy, has initial conditions and final conditions. And natural law is always there. Whether we discover it or not, it's there. The more information and the more accurate my perception are of the initial conditions, it allows me to predict the final conditions. Therefore, my risk goes what? Down. The more information I have, the simpler it looks. The more information I have, the shorter it looks. In fact, if I knew all the information and could perceive it all, which includes the service provider, my company, the buyer, expectations, resources, conditions, etc. If I knew all of that, once that is fixed, what does it also fix? The final conditions. Which means, how much influence, impact, and control do I have once the initial conditions are fixed to get something that's not related to this? It's none. Once again, if you have difficulty with this explanation, go back to your marriage if you've been married. That's before you got married, the first day of your marriage, and today, or when the marriage ended. What changed about your philosophy about the impact, control, and influence you had over your spouse as you go through life? You begin to realize that what? You have none. And it's so true. People are who they are. When they perceive something, that's their reality. So in best value, what we're trying to do now is we take the person who sees the best, increase their vision, take them into the future, help them mitigate risk. Instead of focusing on changing our vendors and changing who they are, we focus on changing what? The system. And we get the right vendor, put them in the right slot. We tell them what they can do to help and become better. And like we discussed this morning in a roundtable, we don't think of every project. We think now, in the future, how is this going to help me? How is this going to take my costs into the future? And we start partnering and planning before we do something, and not when we get a project. And how are we going to do this? By using a process. And Jeroen's going to follow and give you more in the process. I'm not going to take a lot of time on it. We want to select. Then we want our best value to clarify what they're providing. Write most of their contract, which includes our buyer's conditions. And then we want them to mitigate risk. We assume they're an expert. When we only have one, then we ask them technical questions. Just for efficiency. These are our criteria. Now, how do they show us that they're an expert if we don't know what an expert is? Wow, that's the trick. If you're not the expert, right, how do you know if they're the expert? The next slide tells us all. If we're running a design, build, construction project, that has a lot of mechanical systems that are very complicated, and it's a prototype type construction. We want two things from our vendors: claims and dominant information to show that they are an expert. So the claim is, the PM being proposed is very experienced in design, build, mechanical system types, and innovative projects. They don't get any credit for that. They do get credit if they couple that with the dominant information. His record of the last 5 years, he's done 10 of these projects that have been huge projects. His customer satisfaction rating is 9.5. His deviation rate in cost and time is less than 1%. He's an expert. In other words, what we're asking the vendors to do is, how do you know you're an expert? And if they say, this is how I know, and they give us information like this, bang, we know they're an expert. How about if a vendor comes back and says, well, my cousin's doing the work, so you can really trust him. In other words, in best value, do relationships get stronger or weaker? Oh, not a good question. Are relationships more important or less important in best value? They're less. All we want is the straight numbers. I, as the buyer, want to spend more time with my suppliers or less time? Less. In fact, I buy them, I don't want to hear from you. Right? Just give me your performance numbers. No screw-ups. You can screw up, but just make sure you fix it before I hear about it. Then I'm okay. Right? Be accountable for your work. So we have a filtering system that's built on common sense and logic. We meet with the best value vendor. We say, these are the things you have to do. Have your detailed schedule all mapped out. Identify your risk areas. And then we can fill in and help you if we see you missed anything. So this is what each vendor should be doing. Have a detailed technical plan, right? Then identify when they interface with people they don't control. That's where the risk comes. So then give me a risk mitigation for each area that you have risk. And in order that we may know and you may know at the same time that the risk is going, mitigation is going well or bad, give me performance metrics on that. There you have it, right? If you ask a vendor to do this, the only vendor who can do this is a vendor who is what? Visionary. And if they're only half visionary, by requiring them to do this and helping them, they will be visionary. And you've resolved 99% of all your transactions. You can do it when you run best value, or you can actually do the traditional low bid award and do the same thing after that. In other words, the contracting system actually has nothing to do with it. It's a change of what? Mindset. It's not only good, it's not only lower the cost and increase value, but you'll feel good about it when you go home. It's actually a definition of how to make your life happier, better, and have a better opinion not only of others, but yourself. The problem was our system the whole time. If we stop doing what we're traditionally doing, vendors and hire vendors who know what they're doing, the cost will go down and the profit will go up, which is exactly what we want. And performance information is not something for the buyer to control. It's for the vendors to use. You cannot get better if you don't track your own information. We can't do that because it attracts blind vendors. We want vendors who see. And vendors who see will use the best value model. What is best value? It's when people know what they're doing, when they can see into the future. That is why we hire vendors, to optimize our supply chain. And then we'll be happier people. In conclusion, we increase performance, we reduce cost, we actually become better people and become happier people. and we begin to understand people more. It's a better life. Right? What do? Find a best value PIPS trained mentor. Oh, that's Jeroen. That's you. We create transparency with simplicity. We identify visionaries within our own company, then we educate and implement. And NEVI has an education, and they have a certification program which they're going to bring online. It's sorely needed.
15 minutes.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.